Well, Yvonne, good morning here from Ann Arbor and good evening to you. So, Linda Son was formerly a political aide in the Democratic or in Democratic circles in New York State, to include, I believe, serving time with the current governor, Kathy Hochul, and previously with Andrew Cuomo when he was governor. So this is someone who had risen to the inner circle of Democratic politics in New York State. And the fact that she's now been charged by the Department of Justice and arrested by the FBI and she and her husband facing all these charges in the indictment, that's a pretty shocking development.
How was her alleged work for the Chinese government discovered, and what formal charges have been laid?
So that investigation into her appears to have been going on for several years, and I'm sure there were a variety of different methods and techniques that were used to build the case against Linda Sun and her husband. It appears that a lot of this is based on, or a lot of the investigation is based on the financial transactions that she and her husband were involved in, and based on what's revealed in the indictment, an enormous amount, or they both received an enormous amount of money, and then used all these clever financial schemes to sort of try to cover their trails and purchase properties and cars and do all these things you're not supposed to do when you're in public service. And then even if you left public service and you're working on behalf of a foreign government, you have to declare that under the law that they were charged under. And that's what they didn't do. They never declare themselves as agents of the Chinese government.
Can you tell us a bit more about the lavish lifestyle they led, and will all of this be used as evidence against her?
Well, from what's come out is that she and her husband owned a $4.4 million house in Long Island, which most people who work in public service cannot afford. I say that as a former government employee myself. And then they had a separate multi-million dollar condominium in Honolulu. The husband apparently bought very brand new luxury vehicles. So these are all red flags for if you're building an investigation or a criminal, to say, how is a person who is only supposed to be making X amount of money, at least from their known salary, their known income, now able to afford things that seem far outside their means? And that's probably another thing that led investigators onto their trail, in the sense that they were able to purchase these residences and all the other things, and live this lifestyle that just seemed out of the ordinary for most public servants.
And David, what overall impact do you think their alleged actions likely had on the offers of the former New York governor where she worked?
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of damage control right now within Democratic circles in New York to try to figure out what, if anything, did Linda Sun compromise from a policy perspective. Now, again, this wasn't the Democratic Party. This wasn't Washington, D.C. She wasn't involved in anything, as far as we can tell, from a national security perspective. But if you're looking at it from the other side of the Chinese government, and you're trying to find someone who's got placement and access to very important people here in the United States, well, Linda Sun was a great candidate for that. And she, over time, got recruited and then was feeding information, or was trying to use her access to influence policy, even within New York, on behalf of the Chinese government. So I still think it's unclear the impact. Obviously, it's significant. Whether it goes beyond New York into Washington or other parts of the country, that'll also be interesting to see. But this to me is just the latest revelation of a much deeper campaign of Chinese influence operations and recruitment for intelligence purposes of people here that they've been doing now for quite a long period of time.
How widespread do you think it is?
Well, it's very widespread. The Washington Post actually yesterday came out with a story that was talking, a separate story about these Chinese influence operations here in the United States that were timed to occur when President Xi came to San Francisco a couple of months ago, and all the things that different elements of the Chinese government were trying to do to sort of promote his visit, and also denigrate anti-Communist Party or anti-Xi protesters here in the United States. So that's pretty interesting revelation. And then there have been a number of espionage-related investigations and cases with people either formerly in the intelligence community, the world that I came from, or in the military, active duty Army, Navy personnel. So this seems to me that we're, at least here in the United States, we're facing a much more pervasive campaign of Chinese intelligence operations and influence operations, and the arrest of Linda Sun is just the latest in this long pattern of activities.
Well, one of those examples that you just mentioned, former CIA officer Alexander Yung Ching Ma admitted he had worked for the Chinese government. What penalties has he faced?
I'm not sure if he got charged with violations of the Espionage Act or other federal laws, but this is, again, as someone who came from that world, that is not something you are supposed to do when you take an oath to defend the U.S. Constitution and protect U.S. national security and be exposed to all this very sensitive information and intelligence. And my colleagues in the intelligence community take great steps to make sure that people do not sort of turn their back on the U.S. government and engage in these kind of activities. And unfortunately, he is an example of someone who did that. But whatever the charges he's facing, I'm sure they're significant, and this is the consequence. This is the consequence of violating your oath to the Constitution.
Just finally, what do you think will likely happen to Linda Sun and her husband now?
Well, now they're going to face a federal criminal trial, and the burden of proof to prove that Linda Sun and her husband were guilty of these charges, the burden of proof rests on the U.S. government. So it's a fair and open criminal trial. They will have Linda Sun and her husband, their defense team, will have access to all the information that the government has, and then it's going to be a question of will they both, based on the evidence that's being presented against them, will they actually try to go to trial and contest that in a jury trial, or will they seek a plea deal with the U.S. government and get a lesser amount of jail time, but then cooperate with the U.S. government to potentially shed insight on some of these other things we've been talking about? So it's unclear how it's going to proceed from that legal perspective.
We'll be watching closely. Javed Ali, thanks so much, as always, for your time.
All right. Thank you, Iman.